see the light inside you, brighter than the skies. Hold on, just let us escape and fly away tonight.
Hi friends, all of us usually carry some unanswered questions in our hearts. Now these questions are very special to us. Many of these questions remain unanswered for a long time. But since man technically is a seeker of the truth, like God intended him to be, from time to time we seek out the answers to these questions. Questions that span from the beginning of time till the end of time. I would like to call these questions as eternal questions. In this video, let's examine one of our special eternal questions. And the question is, how did man end up upon the earth? How and why am I here? Where do I go from here? Is there some point to this existence? And yeah, I can almost guarantee you that what you think as the right answer might not be the complete answer. And so, I encourage you to hold on for just a bit longer so that I can pull the curtains to a grand mental spectacle. Now all of this is of course based on the premise that there is a superlatively wise creator who willed our existence for a purpose. Alright, so let's drill down. Why here on the earth? Why not anywhere else in the entire universe? Why just here? One tiny microscopic dot in the face of the entire universe. And finally, why does the entire universe that has quadrillions of other planets lie vacant, uninhabited and desolate? But the earth, on the contrary, this tiny speck of dirt in this incredibly vast universe, is flourishing, hustling and bustling with life. It almost sticks out like a sore thumb. As a matter of fact, it's the only refuge for life in the universe as we know it, which is why Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos are looking at space for answers, since resources in the earth are finite. It almost seems like the earth has been formed independent of the events of the universe, independent of the desolation of the universe, almost like a brand new creation. Totally unlike all the other planets and solar systems which share the desolation of the universe and lifelessness. In fact, the pioneers of space research, NASA, has been searching for signs of life for decades with no success. And they are still scouring the universe because it is difficult for them with their scientific temperament to accept that the earth is the last bastion of life in this universe, because it really looks stupid on the popular theory of evolution. Because if the theory of evolution is right, then like the earth there must be several other planets supporting life and life forms like us somewhere in those infinite galaxies. Now, don't get me wrong, I am not saying that scientific reasoning is a bad thing, but if it is based on a wrong premise or assumption, you're just bound to fail, no matter how many different angles you choose to look at it, and scores of highly expensive scientific expeditions that you are willing to fund for this cause. Now, let's take a moment to appreciate the seat of life, our home, the earth. Now, the earth stands conspicuously apart like a brilliant spectacle for a heavenly audience, the seat of all forms of life, including us. All life within the whole unmeasurable universe crammed into one tiny box called the earth in the face of the universe. I hope you see the unique setting that I am trying to project over here. Such a unique setting gives testimony to a brilliant purpose which, though is obscured from most, cannot be ignored. I encourage you to ponder upon this unique setting for a brief moment. So once you have pondered enough, you will agree with me that this unique setting is highly deliberate and purposeful in design. In fact, it looks as if we have been set upon a brilliantly lit stage, which is the earth, and there is an audience out there watching our every move. Now, the basic purpose of any creation is to fulfill a purpose, right? Now, if I am a creator or an inventor, I would create something with a lot of love, yes, and also to fulfill a purpose which is very dear to me, would I not? I'm sure the same applies to the divine creator as well. So then, we as his creation do have a very specific and special purpose, and more importantly, a purpose dear to the divine creator himself. And this is the same purpose hidden or obscured from the view of most of humanity. Now, if I ask the question, what role is man supposed to play in the earth? There might be a plethora of answers which are worldly in origin, like spreading love in the world, like Mother Teresa believed to be truthful in word and deed, like Gandhi believed to create a good legacy, like the consumerist icon Steve Jobs believed, and the religious nuts who would say to live by the religious book whatever they have. Now, they are all right in their own way perhaps, but somehow these answers aren't very gratifying intellectually or spiritually. It just fails to do that. Now, I'm not saying that they are wrong and meaningless completely, but to me there still is an ominous absence of a meaningful and strong purpose in these answers. Alright, so let's turn to the Bible, since the story of creation is best described in the book of Genesis. The first chapter of Genesis, the world famous first verse. Genesis chapter 1 verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, it's beyond amazing how so much time and the sum total of all of those awesome works of creation has been condensed into one simple statement. So let's look at the first part. The bulk of the volume of creation. God created the heavens. His creation doubtlessly was a complete work, a perfect work. Unlike humans who face time and resource crunches and therefore they abandon their pet projects, God never has to do that. His creations bear his mark. They are perfect. So, the heavens that God created were perfect. That goes without saying that the heavens were complete too. Now, nothing God creates is without purpose. Heaven had a purpose. It was the abode or resting place of God and his holy angels. So then it's implicit that when God had created the heavens, as per Genesis chapter 1 verse 1, he had also finished creating the angels as well. Now, coming to the second part of the verse, God created the earth. This is where it gets really interesting. But before we go there, let me ask you this. Why would God, who created the innumerable host of heaven and all the magnificent creations in heaven, which was an infinite realm with every angel doing God's work perfectly, feel the need to create another species, another realm, a far inferior and lowly realm named Earth, and then proceed to create man and woman out of the dust of the earth, especially considering that we are nothing in terms of the holiness, wisdom, power and beauty of the angels in heaven. Now, let's return to God creating the earth, the interesting part, as in why God created the earth. Contrary to popular belief, man wasn't the first intelligent species to inhabit the earth. Nope. So who were they? To answer that, let's rewind time to pre-creation time. Amongst the innumerable angels of God, God made one cherub and gave him a special purpose. He was always in the presence of God. His title was the bearer or bringer of light, meaning he was the designated angel to bear the light of God. Light here is the nature or essence of God. Yes, we are talking about Lucifer. When Lucifer was created, he was perfect in every way, in beauty, in power, in wisdom and knowledge about God's ways and his creations. He was a step above than most angels. His job description was to represent God or be God's ambassador wherever he was sent. And he was sent meaning that he would move to and forth from the presence of God. And wherever he went, his job would be to represent God. That was the meaning of his title, light bringer or bearer of light. Now, you wouldn't have to bear light when God is always in front of you, or if you are always in the presence of God, you wouldn't have to bear his light. However, when you move out of the presence of God, you need to do that. And so this cherub was sent by God to the earth for some time and purpose. And he wasn't alone. Earth was the abode of many angels who were also there, sent by God. Here on the earth, all angels reported to Lucifer. He was their chief. So he was the leader of the angels deployed upon the earth. Now with time, he transitioned into their king. Because when I say time, it wasn't in days or years, perhaps eons past. This time of temporary separation from God, Lucifer was beside himself and began to desire the glory God had. He wanted a share of that glory, and thus he became vain in thought and purpose. Isaiah 14:14 says, I will be like the Most High. To the angels who considered him their king, he enlisted them to participate in the original rebellion. Now, something that needs to be considered is, even an ordinary angel has wisdom and power far greater than human imagination. Despite that, Lucifer drew 1/3 of heaven's angels to himself and became their leader. And he began to set up a rival kingdom that was totally opposed to God's kingdom in the earth and the heavens, and in doing so, he attained the title of Satan, which means the adversary or the enemy of God. It is possible and very, very likely that the rebellion in the heavens had begun to spread. The angels with Lucifer were also very well aware of the consequence of their actions before they decided to willfully rebel against God and dispute his sovereignty. Hebrews chapter 10 verse 26 says, For if we sin willfully after we have received the knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains a sacrifice for sins. Now, although this verse is about the sacrifice of Jesus for the sin of mankind, it reveals the rationale behind the judgment of the devil and his demons. The infection of sin and rebellion endangered the hearts and minds of other angels in the heavens. The infection of sin and rebellion endangered the hearts and minds of other angels in the heavens. For their well-being, God was forced to act, and so judgment for Satan and the fallen angels was immediate. The unholy assembly was expelled from the presence of God by the archangel Michael and the armies of heaven. However, God did not destroy Lucifer and the fallen angels. He deferred their sentence. The record had to be set straight, and the righteous judge that he was, he planned to give Lucifer his day in court. Okay, so how did God do that? Let's continue to Genesis chapter 1 verse 2. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep. Now, we have established that Satan and the fallen angels were cast out of heaven. Okay, fine. But, ever wondered where they were cast into? Did God cast them away from the heavens and the earth into some sort of infinite darkness of the universe, away from all creation? Not really. Let's turn to the Bible again. Let's read Isaiah chapter 14 verse 12. How have you fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn, you have been cast down to the earth. So the entire multitude of the fallen angels and Lucifer fell upon the earth. As per the testament of Solomon, the falling angel looks like a fallen meteor. Similar destruction as well. So what would have happened if scores of them fell upon the earth? Obviously, total destruction. The earth couldn't have survived a hit like that. And this state of the earth is what the second verse in Genesis chapter 1 verse 2 is all about. That is, the earth was without form and void. Let's examine the Bible for a better explanation regarding this. And indeed, there is another place where we see a same thing repeated. Jeremiah chapter 4 verse 23 to 25. It reads, I beheld the earth, and lo, it was without form and void, and the heavens they had no light. I beheld the mountains, and lo, they trembled, and all the hills moved lightly. I beheld, and lo, there was no man, and all the birds of the heavens were fled. I beheld, and lo, the fruitful place was a wilderness, and all the cities thereof were broken down at the presence of the Lord, and by his fierce anger. As you can see, abominable sin had resulted in the fierce anger of the Lord, turning the earth without form and void. So, what's more interesting is they had no light anymore. Darkness came to dwell there. It's very obvious that these verses weren't referring merely to physical darkness, but rather an evil congregation of dark forces. It no longer had the presence of God on account of sin, which is what it meant by they had no light. Now let's return to the verse Genesis chapter 1 verse 2 again. It says, darkness was upon the face of the deep. This is most interesting, considering that this was before the 6 days of creation commenced. Before God said, let there be light. So needless to say, it was already pitch black darkness in the heights and the depths of the earth. There was only water everywhere, no land. So one giant ocean, if you please, and it was all dark, totally dark. So why is it emphasized as darkness was upon the face of the deep? Because this wasn't physical darkness. This implied that dark demonic forces were inhabiting the deep, or the abyss. They were in the abyss because they were cast down, and this abyss, or the face of the deep, became their new home. home of the damned. In this case, Lucifer and the fallen angels. So yes, hell or the abyss is right under us. God might not have burned Lucifer and his unholy hosts into oblivion to allow him his day in court, but God made sure all evil remained contained in one place, isolated from the rest of the universe, all of them constrained to the earth, as a matter of fact to the depths of the earth, but who would later deceive man and reclaim the earth as their own. The earth which is destined to perish and be no more, and each day the time is ticking. Genesis chapter 1 verse 3 reads, "The Spirit of God hovered over the waters," or one should say over the ocean, just one big ocean. Well, after they were cast out of heaven upon the earth, God also sent a huge deluge. A deluge of water that was so massive that it covered the earth completely so that no lands were ever seen. It was like one big ocean. The first deluge that purged the surface of the earth of the evil presence of the dark and evil forces and contained them far below the surface of the earth for a brief period of time. Now, this is what is referred to when it says the Spirit of God hovered over the waters. It was just one big ocean. It was actually the direct result of a deluge that is sent by God. So, this is the first deluge which purged the earth of all evil and dark forces. The second and the last one that the earth would ever have was Noah's flood, which did the same exact thing to the Nephilim, sons of fallen angels and women. Okay, let me step out of topic for a bit. When God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah by raining burning sulfur, he had issued a specific warning to Lot by the angels: don't look back and don't stop anywhere in the plain. Even so, Lot's wife disobeyed. Now, notice how God chose to punish Lot's wife. Lot's wife was turned into a pillar of salt. Sodom and Gomorrah was located at the shore of today's Dead Sea. Dead Sea is also called the Sea of Salt. So God had salted the entire region, which was symbolic of some sort of spiritual cleansing. Also, Sodom today has the world's biggest salt caves because of the concentration of salt present in Sodom. This was a direct effect of the judgment of God on that day. So, the presence of so much salt at one place indicated the ritual cleansing process as mentioned in Leviticus chapter 2 verse 13. So, salt was used as a divine symbol of God's righteous judgment and cleansing. Now, keeping that in mind, let's return to our main topic. The Spirit of God hovered over the waters, or the ocean. And what is the one key thing that the oceans have in abundance of, apart from water and fish? It's salt. The oceans are basically just salt water. However, we haven't heard of the earth running out of salt because somehow there was so much salt available, let me emphasize, available on the outer surface of the rocks, and the salt rocks were there before the 6 days of creation. Whom was this divine punishment against? Since there was no man, it had to be for the inhabitants of the earth before man was created. Undoubtedly, this was for Satan and his fallen angels or demons. So salt is a symbol of divine cleansing or purging. Oh, by the way, Catholics use salt as a key ingredient in blessed water to drive away evil spirits. Not that I endorse it, because the scriptures do not explicitly mention the word of God, mentioning the use of salt to ward off demons. One should understand that salt by itself doesn't have any power. It's God's power that drives away the demons. After the great castaway of Lucifer and the fallen angels, God said, "Let there be light." The Lord called out light to existence for the earth, the home of the dark forces, or the former home of the dark forces. God's light began to shine on the surface of the earth. That's why the forces of darkness upon the surface were forced into the abyss below. Light shone forth in the place of darkness and desolation on the surface. Obviously, Satan had no power there as long as God was busy working on the surface. God caused light to shine in the darkness. So that means God created a space independent of the dark forces. Satan and his angels or fallen angels could not breach it. A space for an entity that God was going to unleash. Satan must have realized quickly he was no longer the master of the earth. So now the earth's lordship or ownership was going to be transferred from him to some other entity. Question was, who indeed? Finally, God concluded with his creation by making man, Adam, on the last day of creation, and he chose the least honorable of all elements in the universe to do it, the dust or the earth. He put Adam in the space of light, the Garden of Eden. Adam was now the new Lord of Eden. For Adam too was a being of light before he sinned, of course. God formed Adam out of dust and breathed life into him. Adam had practically no knowledge of the war that had taken place in heaven. He was a blissful baby. Although this baby was more than 30 years old in appearance, he knew only one person, God. Heaven applauded at God's masterpiece, and God loved his baby, for this wasn't a baby but a species who intrigued heaven and drew the ire of hell. Man was most inferior to angels in every respect, in terms of looks, strength, intelligence, knowledge. In fact, he was so weak intellectually that it was very easy for Lucifer to dupe Eve and then Adam through Eve into sinning and equating their position as doomed beings. In every way, man and Lucifer were in the same boat, sinners and rebels against God's commandments. However, there were two key differences that Satan did not see through at that time. Number one, Adam fell on account of deception. He did not willfully disobey like Lucifer. His disobedience was only due to deception, owing to lack of knowledge and wisdom. Number two, second most important part, Adam, who was created out of dust, was able or had an ability to repent, something that Lucifer or the fallen angels were not capable of, for angels do not change their minds or repent. By the way, angels are not made of dust, but ancient rock, and like rocks, they do not change. Based on both these premises, the righteous God could work for Adam's salvation. The angels, realizing God's master plan, rejoiced. Adam conversed daily with God, because Adam, a creation of dust, could repent far more easily than the angels, who were unable to easily change their minds. Lucifer and the fallen angels, who were in the presence of God for millennia. In fact, Lucifer glimpsed the Lord face to face. This meant that he and the fallen angels were filled with the knowledge and wisdom emanating from God's presence for millennia. So this also meant that they knew the implications and the consequences of sin very, very well. Men and women don't get born in heaven in the presence of God, nor do they know anything about Him when born. They get born on the earth, which is filled with the corruption and darkness, ruled by the powers of darkness. This is why man was gifted the privilege of the chance to salvation, and the fallen angels did not. In due time, God sent His own Son to die for the sin of mankind. It is the blood of His Son, Jesus, that was used to pay for our lives back, so that the faithful to God can not only be redeemed, but also emerge 100% victorious against every deception and temptation from the devil. These are the people God will absolutely dote on and express His undying love for. Yes, the devil and his demons deceive and enslave men and women and children into sin even today, and he is the dark prince of the world. But there will always be, in every generation, people who by God's grace would disregard their suffering, resist the devil's ways that govern the world today, and try to live right before God after accepting the sacrifice that Jesus had made for their sins in their own hearts. These are the faithful of God, and to be such is the beginning of the path of salvation. And finally, be a befitting reply to the atrocious claim of the devil to the throne of God, challenging His sovereignty. God actually could have vaporized Lucifer right then when sin had emerged in creation. But God is not man, and the righteous God allowed the devil his day in court. So, man can live only by two principles. He could either be God's ambassador, or he could be the devil's. Whether man likes it or not, there isn't a third way or alternative. On the ultimate day of judgment, God will be proved right by these faithful who loved Him back of their own accord, not out of compulsion, and were tested with fiery trials on the earth to prove their hearts to be aright with God, and thus He would be glorified in them. And therefore, they would stand in God's glory and ascend to glorious heights even above the angels. What a glorious day that would be indeed. And finally, God would then abolish death itself. No more death. All that remains would be eternal peace. Let me end with a verse from the last book in the Bible, commending the victorious. Revelation chapter 21 verse 4. And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There shall be no more death, nor sorrow, nor crying. There shall be no more pain, for the former things have passed away.